So, let's talk about Marxist ecology. Is it red? Is it green? Or is it somehow both? You know, with our planet in the state it's in, this isn't just some abstract academic question. It really gets to the very heart of how we understand the problem and what we might actually be able to do about it.
Look, we all see the headlines about the climate crisis every single day. But what if the root cause isn't just about our individual choices or, a few bad policies? What if it's baked right into the DNA of our entire economic system? Some thinkers argue that capital's constant, endless pursuit of profit is, by its very nature, on a collision course with the environment.
Okay, so let's really dive into this. For this explainer, we're going to be drawing from this journal here. It traces a really fascinating and honestly often overlooked line of ecological thought. It connects green ideas all the way back through red theory, a thread that started over 150 years ago.
So here's our game plan for this little historical detective story. First, we'll tackle that central question: red, green, or both? Then we're going to investigate the case of Karl Marx himself. From there, we'll be following the green thread through a whole century of thought. That'll lead us to modern eco-socialist thought. And finally, we'll explore a proposed solution called an ecological civilization.
Right, so first things first, red, green, or both. Our starting point here is the idea that the environment is a profoundly political and class-based issue. The source we're looking at argues that you just can't separate the ecological crisis from the economic system that created it. So how exactly do these two ideas intersect?
To find out, we have to go back to the beginning, uncovering the first clue in the case of Karl Marx. Now, for decades, a lot of people, even some Marxists, just kind of dismissed him, saying he had little to nothing to say about the environment. So let's look at the case for and against.
Okay, so on one side you have the charge. The accusation is that Marx was a Promethean, that he was obsessed with industrial growth at any cost, and that he wanted humanity to just master and conquer nature. But then, on the other side, you've got the defense. They argue that this is a complete misreading, and that Marx was actually one of the first thinkers to really systematically analyze capitalism's destructive relationship with the natural world.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The key clue to understanding Marx's ecological thought doesn't actually come from politics, it comes from science. He was heavily influenced by the work of an agricultural chemist named Justus von Liebig, who was studying a huge problem in 19th century Britain: soil exhaustion.
This influence led Marx to develop his theory of the metabolic rift. Now, this is the absolute key, so let's break it down. The basic idea is that capitalism creates an irreparable rift, a break in the relationship, in the metabolism, between human society and the natural world. And it does this by disrupting essential natural cycles.
And here's how it works. Liebig actually called British agriculture a robbery system. Pretty strong words, right? So step 1, nutrients are taken from the soil in the countryside. Step 2, all that food and fiber is shipped over long distances into the cities. Step 3, the human and industrial waste pollutes those cities and waterways. And here's the kicker. Step 4, those soil nutrients are never returned. The natural cycle is broken, and the land gets degraded for future generations.
And you've got to understand, this was not just some passing thought for Marx. In his major work, Capital, he wrote that a systematic restoration of this metabolism was essential. He saw it as a fundamental regulatory law for any rational society, pointing toward a future that could heal this rift that capitalism had created.
Now, Marx's idea of the metabolic rift wasn't forgotten, not at all. It became this green thread that other thinkers picked up, weaving it through their own analyses for the next 100 years. So let's follow that thread.
And you can see that clear lineage right here. After Marx and Engels in the 1860s, you've got Rosa Luxemburg in the 1910s, who saw that capital strive to accumulate exploits both labor and nature. Fast forward to the 1970s, and you have Soviet climatologists like Budiko, who were explicitly using this concept of metabolism in their climate models. Around the same time, the philosopher Georgy Lukács expanded the idea into a social metabolism, looking at how our social relations shape our entire interaction with the natural world.
And all of this brings us to the late 20th and early 21st centuries. This is the big revelation, where all those threads were pulled together into what we now call modern eco-socialist thought, offering a direct response to our current crisis.
3 key figures really stand out here. First, James O'Connor.
He introduced the idea of a second contradiction, arguing that capitalism doesn't just exploit labor, it also undermines its own existence by destroying the environment it needs to survive. Then you've got Paul Burkett, who was so important for reviving Marx's ecological work and systematically dismantling that old Promethean charge. And finally, John Bellamy Foster built on all this, calling for an eco-social revolution to completely transform our relationship with nature.
From this revival, two major ideas have kind of emerged. On one hand, you have eco-socialism, which calls for a revolutionary break with the profit-driven logic of capitalism to create a more egalitarian system. But on the other hand, you have a newer idea called degrowth communism. It argues that any society after capitalism has to actively reject the goal of endless growth itself and instead go for a sustainable, steady-state economy, a path they argue Marx himself was heading toward in his later years.
So where does this all leave us? Well, the source material concludes by looking at one proposed synthesis of these ideas, a potential solution which it calls an ecological civilization.
So what is it? Well, the goal, as defined by the Chinese Marxist Chen Yuwen, is a vision for a whole new stage of human development, one built on harmony between humanity and nature, instead of domination.
Now, what's crucial here is that the source we're examining posits that this isn't just some abstract theory. It argues that this very concept is actively shaping policy in modern China, representing a real-world attempt to unite environmental protection with social and economic development. Which brings us right back to our original question. Following this thread all the way from the metabolic rift to ecological civilization, it really suggests a deep connection between red and green thinking. But is it a necessary partnership for our planet's survival? Or is there a fundamental contradiction there that just can't be resolved? That's the question this historical perspective really leaves us to grapple with.